Welcome to the second in our series, Shabbos Inside Out. We're going to have a look in this class at the subject of Melachah. We all know that on Shabbos, it says that we shouldn't do any work. We shouldn't do any Melachah. Kol Melachah lo sasa, don't do any work, don't do any Melachah on Shabbos. The Talmud in Tractate Shabbos delineates there's 39 Melachas, 39 categories of Melachah, of work, which are prohibited on Shabbos. So what we're going to have a look in this class is exactly what is Melachah, because our usual definition of Melachah cannot be referred to in this context. So for example, if a person carries a key from a private domain to a public domain, now that's hardly hard work, and yet through that a person has transgressed the Melachah, the work of hoitzah, of the transferring from a private domain to a public domain, or vice versa. So therefore we can see that the concept of work as being something which is difficult to do, you can't apply over here. So what exactly is Melachah? So the Talmud says that anything which was considered Melachah in the construction of the tabernacle in the desert, and there are 39 categories of that Melachah, those are the Melachos, the work categories that one can't do on Shabbos. However, as we've seen in the example of hoitzah, of carrying, it has nothing to do with physical or strenuous work. So what does it have to do with? And that's what we're going to look at in this week's class. We're going to start off with the verse which says, Ki sheishes yomim oso Hashem es hashamayim v'yes ha'oretz uvayoyim hashevi shavas vayinofash. In 6 days, also Hashem made the heavens and the earth. Uvayom hashvi, and on the 7th day, Shavas, he rested, vayinofash, and he was refreshed. Now, our sages tell us in Pirkei Avos, in the Ethics of the Fathers, Ba'asara ma'amoros nivra ha'olam. The world was created with 10 utterances. Creation is done through divine speech. Why is speech a metaphor for creation? Because just as thousands of thoughts are contracted and distilled into a few words in the speech process, similarly, infinite energies are contracted, focused into creative packages which are conveyed through letters and words. In fact, it's with the 22 letters of the Aleph base and the 10 Sephiros with which the world was created. These are called the Lamed Beis Nesivas Chachma, the 32 pathways of wisdom, 22 letters, plus 10 spheres, 32 pathways of wisdom, which we'll come back to later. And this contraction of infinite energy into finite creative packages, this is called speech. So when Hashem created light, for example, he said, Yehi Or. And as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, in Shar HaYichud v'Ha'emunah, in the gateway of faith and unity, what happens is that physical light is created through the combination of the letters Aleph, Vav, and Resh. So for example, if we think of the letters of the Aleph base as elements in the periodic table, we know, for example, when you mix sodium and chlorine, You make a shidduch between a very volatile metal and a poisonous gas, put them together, and you can create salt which lasts forever. So, similarly, by combining letters, each of which is a representative of a certain divine power, we can create physical items. Put together Aleph, Vav, and Resh, and you create Or. And therefore the name of something, as it is in the Holy Tongue of Hebrew, not just is a name by consensus, but it actually is a name which is the name which carries the essence of the divine creative power which creates that item. The Baal Shem Tov told us, based on the verse in Tehillim, Lo'olam Hashem, continually God, Devarcha nitzav b'shamayim, your words are standing in the heavens, the creation was not a one-off process. Rather, creation is ongoing. So the creation yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, is an ongoing process. Every single second, divine creative energy is pulsating through the cosmos to create it ex nihilo, something from nothing. In the words of the Alter Rebbe, if God were to withdraw that energy for an instant, then the world would simply cease to exist. And therefore, the true being of the world, the true metzius or establishment of the world, is because of the divine creative energy which is making it. And therefore, truly, ein od milvadoi, there is nothing else beside God. Although to our physical eyes we see a universe, however, that is only there and sustained because of the divine creative energy which is pumped into it. Einstein gave us the equation E equals mc squared. There's a relationship between energy and mass. We could call E the divine energy that creates that mass, and that energy stems and is sourced in God. That being the case, we can ask a major question when it comes to Shabbos. It says in the Torah, 6 days God made creation, and on the 7th day he rested. Now the implication is that the words of the 10 utterances which were said through the 6 days of creation stopped. Now, if according to what we've explained from the Baal Shem Tov, that the world only exists because of the continual flow of energy into the world, and were God to withdraw it for an instant, it would cease to exist. If that's the case, how does the world exist on Shabbos if God rests and withdraws the 10 utterances of creation? This question is asked in numerous places in Chassidus, and in the class today we will give the answer which is presented in those ma'amorim, in those discourses. Let's start off by quoting another pasuk, another verse. It says, on Shabbos, Kivoy shavas mikol malachtoi, on Shabbos Hashem rested from all his work, asher bara Elokim lasos, which Elokim, one of the names of God, bara, created, lasos, to do. What is this expression, bara Elokim lasos, which God created to do? And one final question. If there is a form of creation also on Shabbos, surely that is a Melachah. And God said that one may not do any Melachah on Shabbos. And we have a principle Magid devarav liYaakov, chukav u'mishpatav liYisrael. That which God instructs the Jewish people to do, he does himself. So if we are not allowed to do Melachah, he's not allowed to do Melachah. So if he continues creating the world on Shabbos, surely that should constitute a prohibited action. So how can God do that? Let's take a mashal, a parable, that of a painter or a author. Imagine a author who is writing a book, a painter who is painting a painting. At the moment that they're painting or writing, all their mind and creativity is invested in what they're painting or writing. So let's think of the human being in terms of three processes: machshava, thought; dibur, speech; maisa, action. The machshava, the thought process of the author, of the artist, is completely invested and comes through into the maisa, into the deed of the writing or of the painting. Each brush of the paint on the canvas is coming from the picture which is in the mind of the artist, and skillfully the artist transplants that which is in their thought on the canvas. The essay which is in the mind of the author into ink on paper. When the artist has finished, when the work has been done, the artist sits back, looks at the painting, and marvels. Because what has happened is that which was originally in thought has now been skillfully and artfully transplanted onto the canvas. And whereas whilst doing the work, there was this tremendous investment of mind into action, now what is happening is there's a withdrawal of that investment and a revelation of the level of what we call tainug, delight. Same thing with the author. When the author, when he's finished and he rereads what is written, is thrilled with delight at the tremendous style and writing which has actually come out on paper. Now, let's transplant that mashal, that parable, into creation. We know that there is a seder hishtalshelus, a chain order of creation. We've spoken many times about the various rungs of the ladder of this chain, the various worlds, the worlds of Atzilus, the world of emanation, the worlds of Bria, creation, Yetzira, formation, and Asiya, action. In general, those four worlds can be correlated to the soul and its garments. The soul itself is the world of Atzilus, the world of emanation. The garment of machshava, of thought, is the world of Bria. Speech, the world of Yetzira, and action, the world of Asiya. The mouth, so to speak, of God is Malchus, the Sephira of Malchus of the world of Atzilus. When God speaks the 10 utterances, there is created an independent being. That's called a Bria, an independent being, although in the world of Bria, it's completely nullified to the Godhead. As it comes further down the chain order into the world of Yetzira and finally into Asiya, it gets further detached as, for example, speech. You don't need to speak if you're alone in the room. Only if you wish to converse with somebody else do you use speech. Similarly, once you've made something, the item that you've made can completely exist without you. It doesn't need your further input to exist. And so, in the act of creation, the Asara Mamoris, the 10 utterances of creation, the combinations of divine creative energies, as they percolate down the chain order of creation, they form the physical creation. Unlike physical creation where you can, for example, make a pot and it can exist on the table by itself without the potter, the Alter Rebbe explains in Shara Yichud V'Emunah in Tanya that, so to speak, God's hands need to be constantly on the divine creative potter table in order to create something from nothing every single second. And hence our question, if on Shabbos God withdraws that energy, then the world will cease to exist. So the answer is that no, God does not stop uttering the 10 utterances on Shabbos. Those continue. However, what God does do is God withdraws, so to speak, to the thought level. And the energy which flows to the world on Shabbos comes from a higher level, the level of thought, rather than coming down through speech and into action. Let's give another parable over here. There is the concept of a Baal Teshuvah. A Baal Teshuvah is a person who is a returnee, a person who has transgressed and returned. The Rambam, Maimonides, in his Laws of Teshuvah, tells us all about a Baal Teshuvah and how they should conduct themselves. One of the things which he says fascinatingly is that a Baal Teshuvah should become a different person than they were beforehand. Something else, something quite different. Until now they were one thing, and now they're a different. They have a different persona. They originally were one type of person, and now they're a different type of person. So, if you're asking, when you see a Baal Teshuvah, is it the same human being? Well, the answer is yes. In terms of flesh and blood, there's no change. But in terms of persona, there's a major change. And this is the answer of how the world changes on Shabbos. Although externally there is no change, in other words, externally we do not see in the creation a difference between weekday and Shabbos, although there is a fascinating midrash that says that there is a river called the river Sambation that during the week is explosive and is quite volcanic and throws up rocks, etc. However, on Shabbos it rests. So the midrash actually does give a physical example of how the world changes on Shabbos. And in fact, the Talmud as well says that the outward appearance of a person, the sihivas aponim, the shining of the face and of the countenance, is in fact different on Shabbos than it is on a weekdays. So perhaps we can discern in the physical person a change on Shabbos, but in general, we have a look outside the window. The world doesn't look too much different on Saturday than it does on Sunday. But that is only because we're looking externally. Internally, yes, of course, there is the flow of the 10 utterances on Shabbos, but internally, like the Baal Teshuvah who has changed persona, so too on Shabbos, the flow or the source of the energy that comes to the world is from a higher level, from the level of divine thought rather than action. It's interesting to note that the letters Shabbos also have the letters Toshev. Shin Beis Saf is Shabbos. Tov Shin Beis Toshev, which is the root of the word Teshuvah. It is a misconcept to think that the idea of Teshuvah is only when a person repents from transgression. The root of the word Toshev or Teshuvah is Loshuv, to return. As the verse says in Koheles, V'haruach toshuv elhu elokim asher nasana. The spirit returneth to God who gave it. So the idea of Teshuvah actually is a return to one's pristine essence, to where one was originally. Let's have a look at it in terms of soul descent. The soul originally came from the thought level of God. It came from the higher worlds. It descended into the mud and mire of the lowly pit of this physical, material, and sometimes crass world. And therefore, Toshev, Teshuvah, return, is about refinding and becoming sensitive to the original spiritual essence. When will that happen fully in terms of world history? It will happen when Mashiach will come, and especially after the resurrection of the dead. And therefore, in terms of world history, we can see it in terms of millennia, that we are now in the 6th millennium, in the year 5,700, and in the date of this particular class, 82. However, once we reach the year 6,000, and even before that, we will step into the Shabbos day, each day of God being 1,000 years. So we are now literally on the eve of Shabbos. When the world will enter a period of Shabbos, it will return in its spiritual essence to a higher level. And that's why Isaiah and the other prophets talk of a time when the flesh will actually perceive and see godliness. However, now, whilst we're still in a state of physical and spiritual exile, the world opaques, conceals that essence. There is, however, one day a week where we step out of that concealment, and that's Shabbos. Shabbos is a taste of the world to come. Now let's have a look at the Kiddush which we say on Friday night. We say, Vayechal Elokim Bayom Hashvi, and God finished on the 7th day. That can also be translated, Vayechal Elokim, the name Elokim is finished on the 7th day. If you have a look in Genesis, you will find that the name Elokim appears 32 times. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ves haaretz. In the beginning, God created. 32 times the name Elokim before the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei Havaya. Now, if you take the numerical value of the name Elokim, Aleph, Lamed, Hey, Yud, Mem. Aleph is 1, Lamed is 30, Hey is 5, Yud is 10, Mem is 40. It equals 86. That is the same numerical value as the word Hateva, which means nature. So Elohim is the name of God as he is manifest within nature. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei Havaya is the name of God as God transcends nature. So Shabbos is that day when Vayachal Elohim Bayom Hashvi, when the name Elohim, meaning the concealment of nature, is finished on the seventh day, and it is a Shabbos Lashem, a Shabbos to the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. It's interesting. On Friday night, we all stand and make Kiddush. There are different customs as to where we start the Kiddush from, which words. The Ashkenazic custom is to say silently the words Vayehi Erev, Vayehi Voiker, and then say aloud the words Yom HaShishi. In Chabad, we do not even say the words Vayer, Vayevoiker. We start the Kiddush by saying Yom HaShishi, Vayechulu HaShamayim, the sixth day, and the heavens were finished. We stand. Why? Because the first letters of Yom HaShishi, Vayechulu HaShamayim, Yom is the letter Yud, HaShishi the letter Hey, Vayechulu the letter Vav, HaShamayim the letter Hey, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Shabbos is the day that Elohim is finished, and we stand as witnesses, bearing witness to the fact that God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested, by saying the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Now, what do we mean he rested? That means he withdraws to the state of ta'anug, of pleasure. It doesn't mean that he doesn't continue pumping divine creative energy into creation, because if he would withdraw that for an instant, everything would cease to exist. Rather, it means that the chayas, the energy of those creative packages, don't come as they have been contracted and concealed within the deed, but rather they come from the level of machshava, of thought, and hence there is a tremendous withdrawal and pleasure and tainug and delight, oneg, which Hashem has in creation. So just like a worker who stops working and looks back at what they've created, similarly Hashem stops creating on Shabbos, stops investing, stops contracting, stops focusing, but just steps back. And now we have the definition, therefore, of Melachah. Melachah is when one changes the status of something. One invests, one focuses, one contracts. It's not a step back of menucha, of resting. So do not define Melachah as something which is hard work. On Shabbos, technically, it's permitted to carry 5 chairs up and down the stairs. So even though that's very strenuous, but if, for example, let's say you need 5 chairs moving from upstairs, downstairs into your dining room, you can carry them, even though you might sweat and exert yourself in doing it. But you can't carry a key out of the door, from the private domain to the public domain. That's why we have Shabbos belts, because a garment you are allowed to wear on Shabbos, and if you make the key part of the belt, then it's not considered carrying. So Shabbos really has nothing to do with physical or strenuous activity. Rather, Shabbos has to do with creativity. And our sages tell us that there are 39 categories of being creative, and investment and of changing status. And when we learn the laws of Shabbos and we keep the laws of Shabbos, what happens is that the laws themselves maneuver us into a state of menucha, of tranquility and rest. So Shabbos is closely related to the concept of teshuvah. Shabbos is related to the concept of oineg. We will in further classes speak about different levels in teshuvah. We will also speak about the concept of oneg Shabbos, the idea of taking delight in Shabbos, both physically and spiritually. Shabbos, although externally, as we have said, there seems to be no change in the physical status of the world, but internally, there is a huge change. Now, who is sensitive to that change? A soul of a Jew is sensitive to that change, because it says, "B'tselem Elokim nivra ha'adam." God is created in man is created in God's image. And therefore, the mood, if you want, of the divine is reflected within the soul. And therefore, if God is in a state of ceasing to work, as we've explained, moving from the action to the thought to the delight, that too is reflected within the soul. We will discuss this concept in a further class at length by explaining what the Talmud says, that on Shabbos we receive a neshama yesera, an additional soul. What is that neshama yesera? It's interesting that we use the word neshama. There are many different names for the soul, nefesh, ruach, neshama, but we receive a neshama yesera because in fact nefesh correlates to the world of Asiya, ruach to the world of Yetzira, and neshama to the world of Bria, which is the level of thought. And since on Shabbos the creative energy comes from the world of Bria, therefore we get an additional soul on Shabbos. However, it must be stated that the Kedusha, the holiness of Shabbos, is only felt when one prepares for it. We will speak in a separate class what are the preparations for Shabbos, both physical and spiritual. However, we'll finish this particular class by explaining the concept of Chilul Shabbos, of the desecration of Shabbos. We all know the terms. A person is Shomer Shabbat. A person guards the Shabbos. A person keeps the laws of Shabbos. The opposite of that is Chilul Shabbos, a desecration of Shabbos. Let us understand now more clearly the concept of Chilul, desecration. If a person works on Shabbos and a person does Melachah on Shabbos, what happens is that there's a void, there's a vacuum, because what essentially is happening is that now the energy of the world is coming from a higher level, and there's this person who disregards that is creating within themselves a vacuum. They are not experiencing the higher level of energy and rest which comes on Shabbos. In fact, they are increasing what's called in Kabbalah, the klipa, the peel, the desensitization to that level of Shabbos. Now, It is not the point over here to point a finger at a Mechalel Shabbos, at a person who is a Shabbos desecrator, because the idea of these classes is to encourage everybody step by step to become more observant. The idea of the classes is to highlight the intrinsic beauty and holiness and gift which Shabbos is. Shabbos is a day, an island of tranquility. It's that menucha, cosmic menucha, and soul menucha, tranquility, which a person can attain on Shabbos. It's such a pity if one fills that beautiful island with weekday stuff. One's created a void, a cholol, a vacuum in oneself. It's better to create and to fill it with that holiness and glory and beauty of Shabbos. One final word, and that is that the Kedusha of Shabbos, the holiness of Shabbos, as we said beforehand, only comes when there's hachana, when there's preparation. And therefore, in next week's class, we're going to focus on the preparations for Shabbos. How do we prepare for this awesome day? Because ein kedusha b'li hachana. There is no holiness without preparation. Shabbos is a day that blesses all the days of the coming week. And all the days of the week are a preparation for Shabbos. Shabbos is the vortex around which we revolve. Shabbos is that taste of the world to come. On Shabbos we're elevated. All the worlds are elevated on Shabbos. Shabbos is truly one of the greatest gifts that Hashem gave us. Let us guard that because it's so precious. Let us make sure that we prepare for Shabbos. We keep Shabbos properly. Shabbos then will become our island of serenity, our step out of the creation into the Creator.